Often in Jesus' parables and teachings, he takes the Pharisees and the scribes to task, usually complaining against them because externally they observe the law, but in their hearts they are far from God. And that's what he's doing in the teaching today in the gospel. He's reminding them that they must be purified from within. This would have been a radical thing for Jesus to say, that nothing enters from the outside can defile a person, because they believe that eating unclean food would defile a person. Jesus is saying, no, there is no unclean food, it's all good. That was a radical teaching for Jesus. But then he takes them to task. They lay heavy burdens on others, but they do not do it themselves. I think it was in 1998 in the West, Purell was created, the disinfectant for hands so that we can wash our hands. And then it kind of went all over the place and became a ritual. Everywhere you go, you can find little stanchions that have Purell on it, like right here in the sanctuary. We even got it into the churches. Every church you go to, there's a little bottle of it by the sanctuary, so extraordinary ministers can cleanse their hands before distributing communion. Well, that's to get rid of germs. The kind of cleansing of hands that we're talking about in the gospel is different. It's the purifying, it says, to purify the person. When I wash my hands at Mass, what I say is, Lord, cleanse me of my sin and of all of my iniquities. When I bowed before I read the gospel, cleanse my heart and my lips that I may worthily proclaim the holy gospel. There's an interior desire to be clean and pure from sin. And so that's what Jesus is talking about. He wants us to be purified. My mother would like this because she, even if we had friends over for dinner when we were kids, they had to go wash their hands just like all of us did before we ate. And that's just what we learned. And that's not a bad thing, but this purification is important. Jesus is talking, he lists all these things: unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, licentiousness. That means uncontrolled morality, immoral, uncontrolled, immoral life, and blasphemy and so forth. Those are the things we need to get rid of. We all have traditions, and that's what this cleansing of hands was, a tradition. It was never really written in the Bible. For example, 60 years ago, when you came to church, all the women were wearing either a hat or a veil, remember? And that was prescribed in the canon law, a code of canon law in 1917. It was stated that women should wear a hat or a veil when they come to church. On the other hand, it was considered total disrespect if a man wore a hat in church. Remember the little clips that used to be on all the pews? Those were hat clips, so the men could take their hat off and hang it up during Mass. Well, then the practice kind of just fell away, and women started not wearing a veil or a hat. There was no commandment to do it, really. And so the Code of Canon Law in 1983 didn't even mention it, and it just sort of disappeared. Some women today prefer to wear a hat or a veil to Mass. To me, that's a sign of their spirituality, their humility. It reminds them, I hope, of the fact that they're in a sacred place and they want to be very reverent. But it's not necessary. We can eat meat on Friday now, except for the 5 Fridays of Lent. I still don't eat meat on Friday. I grew up with that. But it reminds me of the fact there's no law that says I have to do it, but it reminds me of the fact that I should be detached from some material things to draw me closer to God. So our traditions and practices, what Jesus is saying, should change our lives. They should change our hearts. We should have hearts that are filled with charity and joy and goodness and peace and chastity and all those things. That's what should come from our hearts. And so the gospel today is important for us to realize that it's not enough just to show up at Mass. We have to live the Mass. And we live it by the virtuous lives that we live each day. And then we become a light for others who are around us. So it's an important message today. Look into our hearts and see, are we doing things that draw us closer to Jesus or farther away?